Good afternoon. My name is Jaywant Parbhoo.
And I'm Dipak Parbhoo, one of the members of Duracell. My other brother, whose name is Jayraj, is not here today. So basically, Jaywant will give the introduction of Duracell.
Yes. So we're the sons of Ambaram Parbhoo, who used to be the previous owner of Duracell. And this year is quite significant in that Duracell shoe store, which is in Hall Street, Wynberg, is 90 years old. So our topic is Duracell 90 years in Wynberg. And in fact, here you can just see a picture of Duracell, and still has those old Victorian pots on top there, showing the style of the time that it was actually built. So our paternal grandfather, who was named Dipak Parbhoo, had been in South Africa for several years, having come from Kapleta, which is a small village about halfway between Surat and Navsari in the Gujarat state of India. According to immigration records and testimony from villagers of Kapleta, as well as Parag's wife Pammy Jasoda, he left India in 1902 and came to South Africa. He came to Africa actually, and then eventually South Africa. He worked for a year in Port Elizabeth as a shoe repairer, and then moved to King Williamstown, where he rented a shop and fixed shoes and boots. He travelled several times to India, getting married, having children, and then he returned to South Africa in 2015 when he moved to Mafeking. He again travelled a few more times to India, and then he came to Cape Town, where again he travelled to India in 1929 and returned in 1932. So he was quite well travelled, and of course every time going to see his wife, having children, and growing the family. He belonged to a group of shoemakers that all came to South Africa as single men, but who had families in India. They would take turns to look after each other in terms of cooking, housework, shopping, similar to today's migrant workers. We see lots of them in Cape Town at the moment. They even looked after each other's shops when the owner would go back to India to see his family. Thus, Parag ran several shops in Cape Town before settling in Wynberg. So we come to Duracell. In 1933, he rented a shop on the corner of Hall Street and Durban Road in Wynberg. And we actually have an envelope sent from somebody to that address, corner of Durban Road and Hall Street, and it's dated in 1933. And he started the business that would become Duracell. In 1934, he rented a shop next to Maisel's Bottle Store. Maisel's Bottle Store was next on the corner of Pierce Road and Wolf Street. And Maisel was a famous family that ran that bottle store. They then sold that business in 1957 to Wiley and Tate, who restored it. And in fact, I remember as a child seeing a carriage outside the shop. They actually restored that. So he rented the shop there, and this shop had a room behind it, and he lived actually in this room behind the shop. And then when his family came to South Africa, they also lived in this room behind the shop. This shop is now a house named the Armory. It's still there obviously in Wynberg. In 1935, he rented a shop at number 11 Wolf Street, which is the present address of Duracell Shoe Store. And that's the picture that you saw earlier. In April 1935, Parag applied for his wife and children to be allowed into South Africa. This needed verification on the Indian side, and thus this application took quite a long time. They needed lots of verification from people in India to say, look, this is his wife, these are his children, etc. So only on the 8th of April 1936, 8th of April, interestingly enough, is the birthday of my brother Dipak. And in 1936, on the 8th of April, Pammy, together with Ambaram, who was 5 years old, and Maan, 4 years old, disembarked from the Karanja ship in Durban. they travelled by train to Cape Town. And there's an interesting little story here, because this was told to us by one of the elders in our own community. His name is Uttam Lalu. He's quite an old man at the moment, but he told it to us a few years ago, where he said that on the day that they arrived, Pammy and the children, obviously on the train, came to Cape Town station. Parag had gone to Uttam Lalu's father. Their house was in Claremont. He had gone there, I think, for lunch, and then he said he's going to the station. Meanwhile, Pammy arrives in Cape Town. She has the address of Ambaram Lalu on a piece of paper, and she gives it to a taxi driver, and she and the two boys get into the taxi, and they come to Claremont. Parag goes to the station, and he looks all around, and poor Parag, he doesn't see his wife there. And of course, he's really sad and all forlorn. When he comes back to Claremont, Ambaram Lalu decides he's going to play a little prank on him, and he hides the wife and two children away. And he asks Parag, why are you so sad? Parag says, no, I can't understand this, I mean, I went to the station, they weren't there. And then Ambaram Lalu brings out young Ambaram Parbhoo, who's 5 years old, and by the hand, and tells him, asks Parag, do you recognize this boy? And of course, Parag just, smiles out in absolute joy, and there's much laughter from the rest of the family. So quite a nice anecdote. So in 1937, the son Santilal was born in a room behind the shop at the armory. Later that year, Parag bought the block of 3 shops in Hoof Street. That's number 11, 11A and 13. And the family then moved home to the back of the shop at number 11. The daughter Parvati was born there in 1938. In 1940, Parag bought the land behind the shops that extended right up to Durban Road. They planted a vegetable garden there, as well as flowering plants, and my father apparently planted a whole lot of dahlias. He had up to 100 plants of different dahlias there at the Durban Road property. A flood in 1941 caused muddy waters to rush down from the military camp. There's a military camp in Wynberg, and it rushed down the back garden in Durban Road and through the shops and the house in Wolf Street. Santilal actually says he remembers this because the water was so high, he saw this
Drain cover.
the drain cover actually popping up. Yeah. And then in 1942, Nagin was born behind the shop at number 11. So this is the existing shops that are now there in Wynberg. Parag had been very strategic in his approach to the business and looked for areas with a military camp and a convent. This approach worked for him in King Williamstown, in Mafeking. He even went to the DRC, the current DRC. It was called the Belgian Congo then, and he went to a place called Lumbumbashi. I think it was Elizabethville that time. And of course Wynberg, where there was a military camp close to the shop, as well as Springfield Convent. And this brought in a lot of work, and with his hard work ethic and his excellent service, Parag was able to make a success of the business. However, things always don't go perfect. In 1946, a tragedy befell the family when Parag cut his finger on his right hand in the workshop. And he was a makaplan kind of guy, so he bathed the wound with some shoe dye as an antiseptic, because the shoe dye contained alcohol. However, wasn't the best of things to do. The finger turned septic and needed surgery to remove the abscess. Dr. Steenkamp was a newly qualified surgeon, operated on the hand. I think it wasn't very successful, and it developed a claw hand on the right hand, and this left Parag very frustrated, as he no longer could be the breadwinner in the house. This was quite an emotional time for them as a family, because now they've lost their breadwinner. So Ambaram, who was 15 years at the time, 15 years old, he was in grade 10, that we used to call it Standard 8 at Livingston High School. He was forced to give up his schooling, and he came to work in the shoe store, and he obviously did all the shoe repairs, etc. He had ambitions of becoming an engineer, but as the eldest brother in the family, he took on the responsibility as a sense of duty and worked hard to ensure that the family lived well and his siblings were educated. So it was a huge sacrifice on his side to have done this. I still feel emotional when I just think of my father having to give up school at 15. He was a brilliant man, absolutely brilliant man, and but he had this incredible sense of duty towards his family, towards his father, and of course, did what he had to do. It was just that time he did what he had to do. Yeah. And Santilal Nagin then went on to become medical doctors, very famous doctors. Santilal got a scholarship. He was the first one to get a scholarship. He, having graduated at UCT, he was one of the first black doctors at UCT. He later specialized in surgery. He was a surgeon in England, and he was also a breast cancer. He got a PhD for his research, and he did breast cancer research and of course surgery. And then Nagin specializes in anesthesiology. He was an anesthetist. He worked in the at UCT and Grooteskier Hospital, and in fact today he has a museum named after him. The Museum of Anesthetics is named the Nagin Parbhoo Museum of Anesthetics at Grooteskier. In 1952, the family built a double-story house in Durban Road. It was the first in our Gujarati Indian community to have a double-story house, and the family then moved into the house in 1953. The first time that they actually lived in a proper house, obviously living in a back of a shop before that. And I think this is the difference, in fact, between lots of the British colonizers at that time in that area compared to the Parbhoo family. They had to do it all by themselves. The sons and father discussed several names of existing shops in Cape Town. There was a shop called Supercell, which one of Parag's cousins owned. There was Wellcell, there was Durata, there was Roxcell, also a distant cousin in Cape Town owned that. And then they concluded on the name Duracell because they felt that this will signify good and long-lasting repairs. The shoe business continued with the support from the military camp, the convent, and of course the general public as well. Just want to quickly show you. Here is a family photo. This is probably in the late 30s. Here we have Ambaram, the son. That's Parag and his wife Pammy Jasoda and Mohan. So this is just when they kind of started the business and obviously brought that family down. Right. So as he grew older, he obviously could do more things, and Ambaram was also not only just doing shoe repairs, and of course he had this engineering mind. I remember he built even a little steam engine toy that actually worked. I mean, he was quite innovative, but he was also very good in carpentry. So he built the shelves of the shop. He built the counters. We had 2 big counters with glass, etc. He did all of that. He did a mezzanine section. He built a whole big mezzanine section in the front of the shop, and that stored all of the the boxes of shoes and all storage stuff. And he built all of this using a Rockwell circular saw that Dipak still owns today. And of course Dipak is also very handy with doing all kinds of work on using that. Ambaram also had a depot in Deep River at a saddler's shop, and this obviously brought in business from the Deep River area. And when this shop closed, one of their workers was out of work, but he came to come work for my father, and he worked until he retired. I think his name was Clive.
Yeah.
Lovely guy. And he was actually very good. He used to do a lot of the golf work for us, golf bags and saddles or so he used to do for our business. In 1955, Ambaram married Mani Kuvji, whose father Nagar Kuvji had started a shoe shop in Park Road, Wynberg. And that shop was later called Babu's Shoe Store after Mani's brother Babu. Today, we as the current Parbhoo family, we therefore have the unique situation that both our paternal and maternal grandfathers started two shoe shops that are amongst the oldest businesses in Wynberg and still existing today. Duracell is in fact 90 years in Wynberg this year. Parak sadly passed away in 1964 at the age of 79. Ambaram then worked long hours, was passionate about providing excellent service to his customers, which endeared him to the customers who remained loyal to the businesses throughout the generation. I remember people would come in and they'd say, "Oh, we talked about you at our tea party, in Constantia or wherever it is." And so people were talking about him because he had a unique way. He had this way of interacting with them. Sometimes he was he used to look at the shoes and say, "What have you been doing with the shoes? Why are you taking so long to bring it to us?" And you'd rip it apart and say, you must bring it earlier. Don't wait until it's absolutely almost finished. So he used to almost lecture them. And I think this endeared him. He had this character that endeared him to the customers. Besides repairing shoes and other leather goods, Ambaram also took on tricky challenges. So I think that was unique because ladies would come with their bags and little finicky parts had to be fixed up, and you'd weld it and fix it up, very bespoke, repairs. He even, I remember, did books. People would bring fancy books that they wanted a leather covering, and he would fix it, and even if it had a lock, you'd clean it up and maybe restore it in a way. So he had that kind of skill to be able to do. Then I think Dipak's continued that. He also manufactured various designs of sandals. He was quite a innovative and artistic in a way, and he would design these sandals, and he had a famous sandal, an Indian sandal with these straps, uniquely structured, and to be customized for each customer's feet. Obviously, I remember they would put their feet on a piece of paper, you draw it out, and you tell them, "Look at it, this is how it's going to look," and you'd make it up specially for them. And a lot of them would come back afterwards, after their overseas trips, and they would say that the sandals have gone all over the world, and it's so comfortable, etc. He employed several workers down the years. Many of them worked for several years, even until they retired. So he was extremely loyal towards his workers. He really, looked after them, and they stuck with him for many, many years. In fact, currently we have, I think, one that's been there for forever and still with Dipak. But he was a tough boss. He actually taught a lot to his workers, but he demanded extremely high standards at all times. So he was very, very tough in that. He wanted a high standard for the business. Ambaram and Mani had 4 children, 3 sons, Jayraj, Jaywant and Dipak here, and a daughter, Asha. All 3 sons worked in the shop at some point. I worked in 1980. I had left Durban Westville and came and worked in the shop for a while, and then in 1986 and 87, a very difficult time in South Africa, and couldn't get a job and worked in the shop. And then Jayraj started in 1989, Dipak in the 1990s. They joined the business, and they are still there today, and making a success of it. Duracell, under Ambaram's management and leadership, became very well known and supported due to his expert craftsmanship. He developed a skill to alter shoes as per customers' requirements, assisting the disabled according to the doctor's script. So they would come in and you would work it according, so that at least somebody with a impediment could be assisted. And I think that was very important. And also many women's shoes that needed a different look, a different color, and even then material cover. You started covering it with material. You started doing those kind of things, and obviously very expertly done, very professionally done. And even the president's wife came into the shop to have her shoes dyed for a special occasion. He fixed bags, belts, golf bags, and made deliveries to the Royal Cape Golf Club. So he was really building the business beyond just the military. As we went along, he would customize suitcases with wheels. That time, I mean, you couldn't buy those kind of things, so he did it because obviously his customers were going overseas a lot. And I remember assisting him with these many evenings, as he would tell me. He would have a piece of lead and he'd say, hold the lead, and he would, in his stern voice, hold the lead. So he could hammer these special pins that held the wheels to the case, and then he would have a long iron, and he said, hold the iron, and as he sought to open the parts of the pin, so the pin would open up, and then this would fasten the wheels to the case. I also remember having to deliver shoes to customers in the village area. I remember I was very irritated one day because Jayraj and I were watching Wimbledon that day, and he called me from the shop. We were living on top in Durban Road, and he would shout to me, Jaywant, come down here, I've go and deliver some shoes to the customers, and I had to just obviously do it. His reputation spread beyond Wynberg and environments, so that the businesses drew customers from the northern suburbs, from the west coast. People who would come from Langebaan with their shoes, and even from Joburg, people who would come with bags of shoes if they were coming on holiday. Today, some Johannesburg shoe businesses still recommend that their customers' repairs be done by Duracell, and they'll send it down through the business. Several famous people frequented the shop or sent their shoes to be fixed at the Duracell. These include Raymond Ackerman for many, many years, Jane Raffaeli, Barbara Barnard, Garth Leroux, and so many more. I'm sure Dipak can even add to that. In 2006, the shop was transformed into a modern shop, with the front area becoming a showroom for new shoes, while the repair section was enlarged significantly. Today, the boot stitching machine of Dipak Parbhoo is still in use, and obviously modern new machines have also been bought. I think Dipak can even tell us a little story about one of the machines.
Well, many years ago, my father thought about this one particular machine, which is called a Blake stitch machine. And every time he was ready to order, he then delayed it, and eventually when I got into the business 32 years and 1 day later, we brought the machine in from Italy, obviously a much newer version, but eventually we brought that particular machine in. So, and up till today we are still using it very much.
That's great. Yeah, and I mean the finishing machine, there's a long finishing machine in the business used by Ambaram, is still in use today. So I think terms, a lot of these machines are old, but I mean, how did you keep it going? You had parts.
The machines are mainly restored by myself. When they need maintenance, like bearings and new belts and so forth, luckily I've been able to do all of that work. So a lot of the machines are maintained at a very good rate, and they virtually up to date with new bearing technology and belts and so forth, so they run quite well. And where the machines needed to be upgraded, we've obviously upgraded according to newer safety standards. So the workshop has been transformed, one could say, into quite a new environment as far as safety standards are concerned.
Good. Okay, sadly, Ambaram passed away in 2007 at the age of 76. Yeah, he just went so quickly. Very sad. Nowadays, rock climbing, hiking boots are fixed at the shop. So how did you get into rock climbing?
Well, basically, the technology in the industry has changed, whereas a lot of the compounds and substances are more newer made materials, and a lot of other places cannot actually bond these substances. So we went into a lot of in-depth research on how to bond these new materials, and today we've probably got one of the best gluing facilities. A lot of the technology we use is polyurethane based, whereas in the good old days everything was contact adhesive. So we've obviously switched from using old bonding technologies to complete new ones, using heat activation and new modern day presses as well.
Okay, that's obviously that it helps you when you've got a electrical engineer in the business, and so I think Dipak's education has helped him tremendously to obviously advance the business, and especially with the technology. So besides that, they do orthopedic work, they do shoe dyeing, and then that continues with basic shoe repairs, bag repairs. And this complements the sale of new shoes and accessories such as leather foods, wooden shoe trees and long shoe horns. The business also sells Cellini cases and bags. Dipak Parbhoo's adventurous move to South Africa, his Duracell shoe business and the purchase of the property in Wynberg in 1937 has had a huge impact on the lives of his descendants, for which we are all grateful and proud to call ourselves Parbhoos. Ambaram's selfless act of working for the family and building Duracell to the high standard and variety that it enacts today is the legacy of which we are truly thankful and proud that the business today continues into the third generation with Jayraj and Dipak. Thank you very much.
Thank you.